The mountain winds howled as though they carried with them the voices of those who had died centuries ago. Trapped in the cold, their souls forever condemned to wander the slopes of Skyreach. The jagged peaks loomed like sentinels over the frozen wasteland below, where the sky was a dull, indifferent gray. It was a place of death, and I had come to it knowing I would not leave. I'd been born to this life. The cold seeped into my bones, as familiar as the blood in my veins. Skyreach was a land where whispers could kill you, where even the smallest sound could bring death crashing down. The Wyrms could hear everything. Beneath the ice, their endless hunger pulsed with a terrible rhythm, and they waited. Always, we had learned to survive by being silent, by moving like shadows against the frozen cliffs. Every step we took had to be calculated, each breath carefully measured. The Wyrms, massive serpents with bodies that spanned entire ravines, could sense the slightest tremor in the air. And once they had caught the scent of something living, there was no escape. The creatures could burrow through ice as though it was nothing more than soft earth, and when they rose from the depths, they did so with the fury of ages. I had learned that the hard way, like everyone else who had ever lived in these cursed mountains. The Wyrms were not a myth. They were not old stories passed down to scare children into obedience. They were real and they were hungry. I stood at the edge of a cliff now, watching the valley below with careful eyes. The snow was untouched, a blanket of white so pure it seemed to mock the world's cruelty. The only movement came from the faint wind that stirred the surface of the glaciers, creating ripples in the ice that looked almost like veins beneath the skin of the earth. A warning I had learned long ago of the Wyrms' presence. But it was more than that. It was a reminder. We were never truly alone here, and we could never truly rest. The survivors, those few who had made it through the endless winters and the terror of the Wyrms, were hidden in the caves and tunnels far below. Our civilization had crumbled, scattered like dust in the wind, but the remnants of it still lived on in whispers, in the ruins that lay buried beneath the ice. We had once built great cities, carved from stone and ice, a testament to our strength and ambition. But now we were little more than scavengers, hiding, waiting. I had heard rumors of a way out, a path that would lead us far from Skyreach, to a place where the Wyrms could not follow. But it was just that, rumors. No one who had ventured south had ever returned. The ice was thick with their bodies, frozen in place as though time itself had swallowed them whole. And still the whispers called. The survivors in the valley below had told me there were others, far to the north, who had found something. Something powerful. Something ancient. If it existed, it was the key to leaving this place. I turned away from the cliff, pulling my hood tight against the wind. My breath clouded in the air, a fleeting trace of life in the vast emptiness. The mountains did not care about us. They were as indifferent to our existence as the ice beneath our feet. The Wyrms were the only force that mattered here, and they were always watching. I moved toward the narrow path leading down into the valley. The wind had died down, but the silence felt deeper now, as though the world itself had held its breath. There was no sound save for the crunch of my boots against the frozen ground, each step sending a sharp echo into the empty expanse. I could almost hear it, the distant rumble of something moving beneath the ice. It was faint, but it was there. The Wyrms were waking, quickened my pace. I had passed the broken stone walls of an ancient outpost long ago, what had once been the last vestige of defense against whatever had roamed these mountains long before the Wyrms came. Now only half-buried towers and shattered ramparts remained. No one had lived here for decades, perhaps centuries. There was nothing left but the ice and the whispers. I reached the valley floor just as the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting a pale orange glow over the icy expanse. The survivors had built their homes in the crevices of the rock, hidden deep beneath the mountain's frozen skin. From a distance, the settlement looked like a scattering of darkened stones, barely visible against the snow. I could hear their voices before I reached the edge of the cliffs, a low murmur rising from below. They were talking, but their words didn't carry far. Their speech was carefully muted, as if the very act of speaking were an invitation for death. When I finally stepped into the small clearing near the entrance, The first thing I noticed was the thick layer of frost that coated everything, a pale reminder of the constant cold. The settlement was a fortress built from the bones of a dead civilization, tunnels carved into the ice, reinforced by stone, each structure designed for survival. But survival here was a fragile thing. A woman stepped into the entrance of one of the huts as I approached. She was older than I remembered, her face drawn and pale, her eyes sunken from years of living under the shadow of the Wyrms. But she still carried herself like someone who had seen far more than most. Her name was Mara, and she was one of the few who had survived the ice long enough to remember what life was like before the Wyrms. "You're back," she said, her voice a rasp, but not without its edge of accusation. She didn't need to ask where I'd been. She already knew. "I've heard whispers," I replied. "They say there's a way out, a path through the mountains. Something beneath the ice." Mara's eyes narrowed. She stepped aside to let me pass, though her gaze lingered on me like a shadow that didn't quite trust the light. "And you believe that?" I didn't answer immediately. I had seen the desperation in the eyes of the others, felt the cold gnawing at my bones, a gnawing hunger that was not unlike the Wyrms' own. We were all dying here, slowly but surely. "I don't believe in fairy tales," I said, my voice a low growl. "But I have to try." Mara closed the door behind us with a soft thud. The warmth of the hut hit me like a shock, a fleeting comfort that did nothing to quell the gnawing sense of dread I had carried since the moment I'd set foot in this forsaken place. The survivors were gathered in the central room, around a fire that crackled weakly in the corner. They were mostly women and children, but there were a few older men, too, all of them weary and worn, like animals that had long since learned not to trust anyone or anything. They stopped talking as I entered, their gazes flicking to me and then quickly away, as though they feared even the slightest glance might provoke some kind of retribution from the Wyrms lurking beneath the ice. I lowered my hood, my eyes scanning the faces in the room. They were hollow, their expressions empty. Only Mara's face held any semblance of life, but even her eyes were too tired, too haunted to give any hope. "She's been asking about the old path," Mara said, addressing the group, her voice low but clear. "The one that leads to the depths of the valley, to the ancient city." At the mention of the city, a few of them stiffened, their gazes shifting nervously. No one spoke for a long moment. Then, a man with a grizzled beard, his face half frozen from years of exposure, muttered from the back of the room. "That city is nothing but a graveyard. There's nothing there but death." Mara shot him a look, but he didn't flinch. "You're wrong," she said, her voice sharper now. "There's something beneath the ice. And if we don't find it, if we don't make a way out, we'll all die here. Just like they did." The fire crackled between us, the heat flickering in the room like a fleeting memory of warmth, of life. I could feel the weight of their silence pressing in on me, and the air tasted sour, heavy with unspoken words, heavy with fear. "We're already dead," the bearded man said quietly. His eyes were hollow. "What we need isn't a way out. We need to accept what's been done to us." "I'm not going to lie down and die," I snapped. My voice echoed in the small room. "I've seen what's out there. There's a chance. A real chance." Mara's gaze softened, but she didn't say anything. She wasn't certain either, but she understood what I meant. The Wyrms were not just beasts. They were the end of everything, the last breath of a world that had once been great. And yet, some part of me refused to believe that this was the end, that this frozen grave would be our tomb. The others remained silent, eyes turned toward the floor. They had all made their peace with the Wyrms, with the ice, with the slow death that had crept over them for years. But I hadn't. Not yet. "We leave at dawn," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I had fully thought them through. Mara didn't argue. She only nodded, the weight of her years and experience settling into her shoulders like a curse. Dawn came, but it was no salvation. The pale light that filtered through the clouds did little to chase away the perpetual gray that clung to Skyreach like a shroud. It was as if the sun itself had grown weary of this frozen world, content to linger only at the edges of day, reluctant to shed its warmth. The others were already gathered by the time I made my way out of the hut, the wind biting at my face as I stepped into the open. Mara stood at the front, her fur cloak wrapped tight around her frail shoulders, her eyes dark with the weight of a decision she had not wanted to make. "We move quickly," she said, her voice cutting through the cold. "The Wyrms do not like the light, but they are patient, and they know when prey is near." I nodded, the familiar dread gnawing at the back of my neck. We had no choice but to move now, to risk everything on the whispers of an ancient path that might or might not lead us to safety, or to our doom. We walked in silence, the crunch of boots on the ice the only sound that dared to disturb the stillness. The others were huddled close, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon, as though they half expected the ground to split open beneath us at any moment. The path was narrow and treacherous, winding through jagged rocks and frozen ravines. Each step had to be measured, calculated. One wrong move, and the Wyrms would be on us faster than we could blink. I could feel the tension building in the air, the sense of being watched. The Wyrms had their eyes on us, even if we couldn't see them. "We'll reach the old tunnels soon," Mara said, breaking the silence after what seemed like an eternity. "The ancients carved these paths long before the Wyrms came. But don't mistake the tunnels for safety. They are as dangerous as the mountains themselves." I didn't ask her what she meant. I had seen enough in my time here to know that danger was a constant companion in Skyreach. The tunnels were rumored to be haunted by more than just the Wyrms, old spirits, twisted remnants of the civilization that had once lived here. Some of the survivors whispered of things that had been buried beneath the ice, things older than the Wyrms themselves. But I didn't believe in ghosts. Still, the thought of the tunnels gave me pause. The ground beneath our feet had become more unstable as we approached, the ice groaning under the pressure, as though it too had grown tired of the weight of time. The air smelled faintly of salt and decay. There was something ancient about the place, something that set my teeth on edge. Finally, we reached the entrance to the tunnels, a massive archway carved into the stone of the mountain, covered with a thick layer of ice that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The marks of the ancients were still visible, faint symbols etched into the rock, worn by time but not entirely gone. "Stay close," Mara warned, her voice barely a whisper. The tunnels were not meant to be walked by the living. I stepped forward, my breath catching in my throat as I entered the darkened arch. The walls were slick with ice, the air cold enough to freeze the moisture in my lungs. The tunnel stretched before us, an endless black maw that seemed to devour the light from our torches. The others hesitated for a moment, but I was already moving forward, my footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. Every step I took felt like it was dragging me deeper into the belly of the mountain, deeper into the unknown. We had barely moved 50 paces when I felt it. A low rumble, a tremor beneath the ice. It was distant at first, so faint that I might have imagined it. But then it came again, stronger this time, and I could feel the ground beneath me shift. A sound, soft but unmistakable, rippled through the tunnel, like something slithering, moving just out of reach. My heart skipped a beat. "Stay still," I whispered, holding up my hand. The others froze immediately, their eyes wide with fear. The rumble continued, growing louder, closer. It was as though something enormous was making its way through the ice, its body sliding beneath us like a giant serpent coiling in the dark. I strained my ears, trying to make out any sound that might tell me what it was. But there was nothing, just the low, thrumming pulse of the Wyrms beneath the earth. And then, as quickly as it had come, the tremor stopped. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "It's gone," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed my own words. Mara stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "We don't have much time. If the Wyrms have sensed us, we need to move faster." We pressed on, deeper into the tunnels. The walls seemed to close in around us, the darkness thick and oppressive. The further we went, the more the air felt stale, the more I felt as though we were trespassing on something ancient, something not meant for human eyes. The path narrowed, forcing us to move single file. As we rounded a sharp corner, I caught sight of something. A faint glow at the far end of the tunnel. It was not natural light. I moved forward cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The glow grew stronger, brighter, until we reached the source. The tunnel opened up into a vast chamber, its ceiling so high it was lost in darkness. The floor was littered with ancient debris. Broken stone, fragments of shattered walls, the remnants of a civilization that had long since fallen into ruin. And in the center of the chamber stood an enormous structure, half buried in ice, its shape unmistakable. It was a monument to something. The glow I had seen was coming from the cracks in the ice surrounding the structure, from beneath the frozen surface. Something was trapped there, something old, something that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic energy, like the beating of a heart. I had to get closer. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to turn back, but I couldn't. Something was calling me, pulling me toward it. "Stay back," Mara shouted, grabbing my arm just as I took a step forward. But it was too late. The ground beneath us shifted again, and this time, there was no mistaking it. The Wyrms were close, very close. The air in the chamber grew thick with a strange tension, a crackling energy that seemed to hum beneath my skin. The monument at the center of the room loomed large, its surface covered in layers of ancient ice that shimmered in the faint glow beneath. Whatever lay trapped inside it, whatever had been buried in the depths of this mountain, was calling to us, calling to me. Mara pulled at my arm again, her grip tight and desperate. "We don't know what that is," she said, her voice strained, a mix of fear and command. "We don't know what it can do. We need to leave now." But I couldn't pull my eyes away from the monument. There was something about it, something in the way the light flickered through the cracks in the ice, that felt alive. It pulsed, as though the very stone beneath our feet had a heartbeat. A low, thudding pulse that matched the one I had felt beneath the ice earlier. The Wyrms. The tremors beneath our feet had been connected to this place, to whatever power had been buried here. The Wyrms weren't just creatures of hunger. They were connected to this. They had been drawn to it for a reason. "We can't leave," I said, my voice low, almost to myself. I took a step forward, despite Mara's protests. My eyes locked on the monument's surface, where the ice seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that was unnatural. This could be the key to everything, the key to escaping Skyreach. "You're wrong," Mara snapped, her hand tightening around my wrist. "There's no escape from this place. Don't you understand? The Wyrms are a curse. Punishment. This?" She waved her hand toward the monument, the frozen structure. "Whatever this is, it's part of the curse." The tension in the air thickened, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Mara was right. We didn't know what this thing was, what had been sealed away beneath the ice. But I had come this far. The rumors of the ancient city, of the secrets buried in the ice, had led me here for a reason. As I took another step forward, the ground beneath us groaned. A low, rumbling sound that vibrated through my bones. It was a sound I knew too well. The Wyrms were close, very close. Suddenly, a sharp, cracking sound echoed through the chamber. The ice at the base of the monument split, a jagged fissure running up its side. A dark, shadowy shape began to emerge from within, faint at first, but growing more distinct with every passing second. It wasn't just the ice that was moving. The very monument itself seemed to shift, as though the thing inside was alive, awakening after centuries of dormancy. I felt my breath catch in my chest, my heart pounding in my ears as the shadow grew larger, more tangible. Mara stepped back, her face pale, eyes wide with a fear I had never seen before. "We need to go. Now." But it was too late. From the crack in the ice, something emerged. It was not a Wyrm, not the serpent-like creatures I had feared for so long. No, this was something older, something far more dangerous. The shape that crawled from beneath the ice was massive, its body long and serpentine, but covered in ancient runes, glowing symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie, otherworldly light. The creature twisted, its form shifting and contorting as it emerged from the monument. It had no eyes, no mouth, but its presence was felt. It was as if the very air around us had thickened, and the weight of its power pressed down on me like 1,000 tons of stone. For a moment there was silence. Then, a voice, an ancient, guttural sound, rumbled from the depths of the creature. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense, but a vibration in the air, a hum that thrummed in my chest and rattled my teeth. "You should not have come." The words echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the walls. My skin crawled as the voice washed over me, as though the very mountain itself was speaking. Mara stumbled back, her breath shallow. "It's alive. It was never meant to be freed." I couldn't tear my eyes away from the creature. It was magnificent, terrifying, and ancient beyond comprehension. It was more than a Wyrm, more than a beast. It was a part of this place, a fragment of the civilization that had once ruled these lands, now twisted and corrupted by whatever had come before. But there was one thing I knew for certain. This creature, whatever it was connected to the Wyrms. They were not separate. They were part of the same darkness that had descended upon Skyreach. And if we didn't understand what this thing was, we wouldn't survive. The creature's form shifted again, the runes on its body flashing brighter, and then it turned its gaze, if you could call it that, toward us. The air seemed to freeze, and for a moment, I thought the world itself had stopped moving. My heart was a dull thud in my chest, and my throat had gone dry. The hum of its voice filled the space once more, a low, vibrating growl that rattled through my bones. "You awaken me from my slumber, and now you will join the rest. The Wyrms will come for you. There is no escape. You are already dead." Before I could react, the ground trembled again, more violently this time. The rumbling was so intense, so sudden, that I felt myself thrown to the ground, the ice cracking beneath me. The very walls of the chamber began to shift, groaning as though the entire mountain was awakening to the presence of the creature. "The Wyrms come, and when they find you, they will devour you whole." I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing as the ice beneath us continued to shake. The monument trembled with the force of the creature's voice, and I could feel the pressure building in the air. "We have to move," Mara shouted, pulling me toward the exit. But before we could even take a step, the ground split open beneath us. A massive shape, long, serpentine, and covered in scales of ice and shadow, rose from the cracks, its enormous form blocking the way. The Wyrm was here, and we had no way out. The Wyrm loomed over us, its body massive, coiling like a serpent born of ice and shadow. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with a deep, eerie blue, the same hue as the ancient runes that covered the creature's body. The air was thick with its presence, as though the very atmosphere was bending under the weight of its form. Its scales shimmered with a frosty sheen, and the ground trembled beneath us with each subtle movement it made. I could feel the breath in my chest grow shallow as panic clawed at the edges of my mind. The Wyrm's maw opened with a slow, deliberate motion, revealing rows of jagged, ice-crusted teeth. The very sight of it made my stomach churn, but I knew that looking away would be my death. "Run!" Mara's voice broke through the heavy silence, sharp and frantic. She tugged at my arm, but I could barely move. My body was frozen in place, caught between the weight of fear and the pull of something darker. The creature's power, its pull on my very soul. I snapped out of my stupor, jerking my arm from Mara's grasp. "We can't outrun it." My voice was rough, raw with the terror that had lodged itself in my throat. "We don't have a choice." Mara's eyes were wild, and she shoved me forward, urging me toward the far side of the chamber. "We can't stay here, not with it awake." The Wyrm shifted again, its body moving with an unnatural grace, far too quick for something so large. It let out a low, guttural growl, the sound vibrating through the ice and stone like the rumblings of a thunderstorm. The Wyrm was too close. If it wanted us, there would be no escape. But there was no time to think, no time to plan. The creature was too fast, too powerful. All I could do was follow Mara as she darted toward the nearest passage. A narrow gap in the far wall, just wide enough to slip through. We didn't look back. I felt the ground shake beneath us as we ran. The Wyrm's body slithering through the chamber in pursuit. Its breath like the freezing wind, its presence suffocating. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed on, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of doom. We reached the passage just as the Wyrm's enormous head slammed into the ground behind us with a deafening crash. The force of it sent ice and debris flying, the air thick with the acrid scent of frozen stone and ancient dust. We barely had time to slip through the gap, the narrow tunnel barely wide enough for us to crawl through. But even as we made our way down the tight, winding corridor, I could still hear the Wyrm. It was so close. Its roars rumbled through the rock, shaking the walls, shaking my very bones. We weren't safe. Not yet. The tunnel was colder than I had expected, the temperature dropping with each step we took. The ice grew thicker, more solid, as though the mountain itself was trying to seal us inside. The passage twisted and turned, the walls closing in around us, narrowing until I had to move sideways to fit. It was a claustrophobic nightmare, the air stale and heavy with the scent of decay. Mara was ahead of me, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She paused for a moment, glancing back toward me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to get to the deeper tunnels. There's a place where the Wyrms can't go, a place they've never found. If we can make it there." Her words were cut off by the sound of something skittering behind us. Something massive, something that shouldn't have been able to fit in the narrow tunnel. The Wyrm's movements were closer now, the tremors in the ground growing stronger, more relentless. "We don't have time," I shouted, fear clawing at the back of my throat. The Wyrm was gaining on us, its massive body somehow squeezing through the tight spaces with terrifying speed. We had to keep moving. The passage twisted again, leading us into a larger chamber. A cavernous space where the walls were covered in ancient carvings. The stone here was slick with ice, and the floor was uneven, making every step feel like a gamble. The glow from the runes beneath the monument was still faintly visible, flickering like a dying flame, casting long shadows on the walls. I paused for a moment, scanning the chamber for a way out. The Wyrm's roar echoed through the tunnels behind us, closer now than I dared to believe. It was almost upon us. "There," Mara gasped, pointing toward a narrow crack in the far wall, barely visible in the dim light. "It leads deeper. There's an old entrance, a place the Wyrms can't reach." I didn't question her. We didn't have time for anything but the barest hope of survival. I ran toward the crack, squeezing through the gap with Mara right behind me. The air grew colder, sharper, as we descended deeper into the mountain's heart. The deeper we went, the more the air shifted, as though we were leaving the realm of the living and descending into something far darker. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, the silence pressing in on us like a heavy weight. I could still feel the Wyrm's presence, its massive body moving through the tunnels above us, seeking us out, hunting us like prey. The creature's growls were distant now, but still ever present, a constant reminder of how close death was. And then we reached it. A vast, frozen cavern stretched before us, its ceiling lost in shadows, its floor covered in a thick layer of snow and ice. But it wasn't the emptiness that caught my attention. It was what lay at the center of the cavern. A massive, ancient door, carved from the very rock of the mountain itself. It was adorned with intricate symbols, symbols I recognized from the runes on the Wyrm's body, symbols I had seen on the monument. The door was sealed, but it wasn't locked. "We're here," Mara breathed, her voice trembling with something more than fear. There was awe in her eyes. "This is the place the ancients left behind. The way out." I didn't trust the door. I didn't trust any of this. But we had no other choice. If there was even a chance that this could lead us to safety, we had to try. But as I stepped forward, the ground trembled again. This time, it wasn't just the Wyrm. It was something deeper, something older. The very mountain seemed to be awakening, shaking, groaning with an ancient force. And then the door began to move. The door groaned as it shifted, the ancient stone grinding against itself with an eerie, unnatural sound. It wasn't like anything I had ever heard before. Not the creak of a door on rusty hinges, but a deep, resonating vibration that echoed through my chest, rattling my very bones. The mountain seemed to shudder in response, as though it were waking from a long, deep sleep, and the very air around us thickened with an oppressive force. I glanced at Mara. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, but she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her hands trembling, and pushed against the door with all her strength. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, sickening crack, the door slid open just enough to reveal a dark abyss beyond. I could see nothing through the crack, just blackness, an impenetrable void that swallowed the light from our torches. "We have to go," Mara said, her voice strained, almost pleading. "This is the only way. The Wyrms are too close now. This is the only place where they can't follow." I hesitated. Everything about this felt wrong. The Wyrms were hunting us, but this doorway was more than just a means of escape. It was a passage into something far darker, something that had been hidden away beneath the ice for reasons none of us understood. But Mara was right. There was no time to argue, no time to second-guess. The Wyrms were closing in. I forced myself to move, stepping forward into the darkness beyond the door. The temperature dropped immediately, the cold seeping into my bones like a living thing. It was not the same cold as the ice outside. It was far worse, an unnatural chill that bit through my clothes, freezing my breath before it could even escape my lips. Mara was right behind me, her footsteps barely audible in the thick, oppressive silence that now surrounded us. The door creaked shut behind us with a finality that sent a shiver of dread through me. And then we were alone, completely alone. The darkness seemed to press in on us from all sides, thick and suffocating. We could see nothing but the faint, flickering light of our torches, the shadows dancing in grotesque shapes against the walls. There was no sound but the soft, muffled crunch of our footsteps on the icy ground. I kept moving, despite the fear gnawing at me. Mara was beside me, her face pale, but determined. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The silence was thick with unspoken fears, and all I could do was focus on the path ahead. We walked for what felt like hours, though I had no way of knowing how much time had passed. The air grew colder with each step, the temperature plunging further until my breath fogged in front of me, freezing mid-air. And then, as we rounded a sharp corner in the dark passage, the tunnel opened up before us into a vast cavern. A cavern so large that the light from our torches barely reached the walls. The ceiling was lost in shadow, and the floor stretched out endlessly in all directions. At the center of the cavern stood a massive structure, something that looked like a twisted, skeletal tree, its branches reaching up to the ceiling in an unnatural organic sprawl. It was made of stone, but the surface was so smooth and polished it almost looked like bone. The tree-like structure pulsed with a faint, eerie glow, casting a cold, spectral light across the cavern. I felt the weight of it, the sheer presence of the thing. It wasn't just a monument. It was a power, a force of some kind. "Do you see that?" Mara whispered, her voice reverent. It's the heart of Skyreach." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "The heart of Skyreach?" I repeated, my voice hoarse. "What are you talking about?" Mara took a step forward, her eyes wide with awe. The ancients, they believed that the Wyrms were not just creatures, they were the guardians of something. Something far more ancient than them. This structure, it's what they were protecting. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "What is it? What's inside?" Mara didn't answer at first. She stood frozen, staring at the structure with a kind of reverence. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's what's been keeping the Wyrms at bay all this time. The heart. The Wyrms are drawn to it, and it's what keeps the curse of Skyreach alive. The Wyrms were never meant to leave. But the heart, it's dying." My mind spun. The Wyrms? Guardians? The heart is dying. Mara nodded, her expression grim. It's the only reason we're still alive. The Wyrms are tied to it. They feed off of its power. If it dies... She stopped, her words trailing off as she seemed to realize the full weight of what she was saying. If it dies, the Wyrms will come for everything. They'll consume this place. And they won't stop. They'll tear through every living thing until there's nothing left. I felt the floor shift beneath me as I processed her words. The Wyrms weren't just mindless predators. They were bound to this place, bound to the heart, to its power. And if it died, if it failed, they would be unleashed. Skyreach would be consumed in their wake. I took a step forward, drawn to the heart, as if some unseen force was pulling me in. The closer I got, the more I could feel it, the strange energy, the vibration that seemed to pulse through the ground, through the air. The heart was alive, but its life was fading. We have to stop it, I said, more to myself than to Mara. We have to stop the heart from dying. But Mara grabbed my arm, pulling me back. No, you don't understand. It's too late. The Wyrms are already waking. The heart can't be saved anymore. Not by us. There's nothing we can do. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw the true weight of fear in her eyes. It wasn't the fear of the Wyrms, it was the fear of what was coming. Of the end of everything. I swallowed hard, the cold air making my throat burn. There was something in the air, something shifting in the darkness. It wasn't just the Wyrms. It was the mountain itself, responding to the death of the heart. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and I felt a deep, violent vibration surge through my body. The cavern walls cracked. The ice split. The Wyrms had found us. The tremor that shook the cavern was not just the rumbling of the mountain. It was something far more primal. A deep, guttural force that surged from the depths of Skyreach. I felt it in my chest, like the beating of a heart that was not my own, pounding with an intensity that made my bones ache. And then the sound came, a low, reverberating growl, a sound so deep it seemed to come from the very core of the earth. The Wyrms were close, closer than I had ever imagined. The ground beneath our feet buckled, and the air turned heavy with a presence I couldn't fully comprehend. It was as though the Wyrms weren't just creatures. They were a force of nature, a fury that would tear the world apart. Mara's face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her weapon. A jagged shard of obsidian she had scavenged from the ruins of the old city. "We need to move now," she hissed, her voice tight with panic. I didn't need her to tell me. I could feel the Wyrms closing in, their massive bodies shifting beneath the ice, tunneling through the frozen veins of Skyreach. There was no escape. Not now. Not anymore. The heart was dying, its energy waning, and in its wake, the Wyrms had begun to rise. Their hunger was insatiable, their presence like a dark tide that would drown us all. The ground shook again, harder this time. And then, the first Wyrm appeared. It erupted from the wall with terrifying speed, bursting through the ice as if it were nothing more than brittle paper. Its scales glittered like shards of glass, its enormous, serpentine body coiling and uncoiling in a deadly dance. Its eyes, cold and alien, locked onto us with a hunger that sent a wave of cold terror crashing over me. Its maw opened, revealing rows of jagged, ice-crusted teeth that gleamed with the promise of death. The Wyrm hissed, a sound so loud it rattled my teeth, and I barely had time to react before it lunged toward us. "Move!" Mara screamed, shoving me forward as the Wyrm's tail slammed into the ground with enough force to send ice shards flying through the air. We ran, no time to think, no time to hesitate. The Wyrm followed, its massive form sliding across the cavern floor with an unnatural grace, its body twisting and turning with terrifying speed. Every movement it made caused the ground to tremble, each massive coil of its serpentine body sending shockwaves through the air. I could hear its hissing breath behind me, the sound of it drawing nearer with every passing second. Its jaws snapped open again, the icy teeth gleaming as it lunged. "Down!" Mara shouted. We both dropped to the ground just as the Wyrm's massive head swung through the air above us. Its fangs missed by inches, the sheer force of its strike sending a gust of frigid air that nearly knocked the wind from my lungs. We scrambled forward, our hands slipping on the slick ice as the Wyrm's tail whipped through the air, narrowly missing us. We didn't stop to look back. We couldn't. I could hear the Wyrm's growls growing louder, its pursuit relentless. But then, another tremor, and another. The ground beneath our feet began to crack, the ice breaking apart like brittle glass. Something was happening. Something worse than just the Wyrm's hunger. I glanced at Mara. Her face was set in grim determination, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She was just as terrified as I was, if not more. The Wyrms weren't just chasing us. They were part of something far greater. Something that was now unshackled, awakened by the dying heart. The cavern was collapsing. The walls were groaning under the pressure, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of more Wyrms emerging from the ice, their massive bodies crashing through the stone like it was nothing. "We need to get to the heart of this place," Mara shouted over the chaos, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the Wyrms roars. "If we can destroy the heart, maybe we can stop them. Maybe we can." Her words were cut off by a deafening roar that shook the very ground beneath us. The second Wyrm appeared, its enormous body slithering up from the floor with terrifying speed, blocking our path. It was even larger than the first, its dark scales glistening with a malicious sheen, its eyes glowing with a predatory hunger. I felt the ground beneath me shift again, and for the briefest moment, I thought we were done for. But Mara didn't hesitate. She sprang forward, using the momentum to slide beneath the Wyrm's massive tail, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow. I followed, desperate to keep up, but the Wyrm's sheer size made every movement a challenge. We made it to the other side, but not without cost. The Wyrm's tail caught my leg, and I stumbled, falling hard to the ice. Pain shot through me, sharp and hot, but there was no time to dwell on it. I forced myself to my feet, my breath ragged in my chest as the Wyrm roared behind us. "We have to reach the heart," Mara screamed. Her eyes were wide, her voice hoarse with desperation. "Now! It's the only chance we have." I didn't argue. There was no point. The Wyrms were everywhere now, their howls echoing through the cavern like a choir of death, their massive bodies slithering through the ice. We had no choice but to press forward. The heart of Skyreach pulsed faintly ahead of us, its light flickering like a dying star. It was our last hope, our only chance to stop this nightmare from consuming us all. But as we neared the heart, the temperature plummeted even further. The air grew thick, suffocating, as though the very mountain was closing in around us. I could feel my limbs growing stiff from the cold, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The Wyrms were closing in faster now, their roars growing deafening, the ground trembling under the weight of their pursuit. And then I saw it. The heart of Skyreach, the source of everything, lay at the center of a vast chamber. A chamber so large that I couldn't see the far walls in the flickering light. The heart itself was a colossal crystalline structure, pulsing with a sickly, unnatural glow. It stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by a web of runes that glowed with a dim, fading light. It was beautiful, and it was dying. The Wyrms were closing in, their roars deafening now, their massive bodies filling the entrance to the chamber. We were trapped. The heart was our last hope. But as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold crystal, something shifted within me. The power of the heart, its dying energy, seemed to reach into my chest, seizing hold of my very soul. I gasped, choking on the cold air, as the Wyrms surged forward, their eyes locked onto us, their hunger insatiable. The time to act was now. The heart of Skyreach pulsed under my fingertips, its surface slick with the cold of the mountain's ancient power. It was alive, or it had been. Now it flickered weakly, its glow fading in and out like a dying flame. The temperature had plunged so low that the air itself seemed to freeze mid-breath, the sharp chill gnawing at my skin, at my bones. Every movement felt like I was wading through ice, every step an effort to remain standing. Mara was beside me, her face pale, her eyes wild with desperation. "We can't let it die," she hissed, her voice sharp with urgency. "If we don't stop it from fading, the Wyrms will tear this place apart. They'll consume everything." I could hear them. More Wyrms, their hissing breath echoing through the chamber as they neared. Their massive bodies thrashed against the walls, their claws scraping the stone, their howls reverberating like the sound of an avalanche crashing down a mountain. Mara was right. We had no time left. The Wyrms were closing in faster than I had ever feared possible. And if the heart was destroyed, Skyreach would fall, and the creatures would ravage the world with no force to hold them back. But how could we stop it? How could we save the heart, or even use its dying energy? I looked down at the heart, my thoughts spinning. Its power was fading, but there was still something there, something ancient and potent that had been enough to hold the Wyrms in check for centuries. But that power had a cost. The Wyrms, bound to it by some forgotten pact, could sense its weakening. The air itself seemed to crackle with that knowledge, and the Wyrms' hunger was growing with every passing moment. "We have to do something," I muttered, more to myself than to Mara. "We can't just let it die." Mara nodded, her expression grim, her hands shaking as she reached for the heart's crystalline surface. "There's only one way we can save it now. If we can channel the power of the heart, if we can feed it life." The words hung in the air between us like a forbidden truth. There was only one way to keep the Wyrms at bay, and it was something neither of us wanted to face. "You mean?" I didn't finish the sentence. The idea was too terrible, too impossible. "I don't know any other way," Mara said quietly, her gaze locked on the heart, her voice trembling. "The ancients, they used to make sacrifices to keep the Wyrms in check. But the heart's magic is tied to blood." I could feel the air in my lungs freeze. "No, we can't." But before I could protest further, a deafening roar shook the entire cavern, and the ground trembled violently beneath us. I staggered, almost losing my footing as the Wyrms' hunger reached a fever pitch. It was happening. The Wyrms were no longer just hunting. They were coming for us with everything they had. The heart was dying, and we were the only ones who could stop it. I looked at Mara, my heart racing. What are you asking me to do?" Her eyes met mine, full of sorrow and resolve. "I'm asking you to do what must be done. The Wyrms are bound to this place. And if we can feed the heart just for a moment, just long enough to seal their fate, then maybe, just maybe, we can stop them." She stepped closer to the heart, her hand hovering over its surface. It shivered beneath her touch, as though it sensed her intentions. "Mara, no." I reached out, grabbing her arm. "We don't know what will happen if—" But she pulled away, her voice cold as the ice around us. "We don't have a choice, Kai. It's too late for us to run. If we don't do this, the Wyrms will rip through Skyreach, and they'll keep going. They'll wipe out everything. This is our only chance." I wanted to argue, wanted to stop her, but I could see the truth in her eyes. She was right. There was no running from this anymore. There was only one way to fight back. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as the Wyrms' roars grew louder, their approach imminent. Then, with a final glance at Mara, I stepped forward. "We do it together," I said, my voice thick with uncertainty. "We'll share the burden." Mara's eyes softened for a moment, but the fear was still there, buried beneath her determination. "We have no time for hesitation." Without another word, we both placed our hands on the heart. The moment our skin touched the cold crystal, the mountain seemed to come alive with a terrible force. A deep, resonating pulse echoed through my chest, and the air around us began to crackle with an energy I could barely comprehend. The heart's glow flared brighter, a brilliant light that seared through the darkness like a beacon. The Wyrms were close now, so close I could feel their presence, their hunger. And then, the first of them appeared at the entrance to the chamber, its massive head slithering through the shattered walls of ice. Its eyes locked on us with an unmistakable malice, its maw dripping with frozen venom. We had no more time. I felt the heart's magic surge through me, burning, freezing, as though it were fusing with my very soul. The power was overwhelming, consuming me from the inside out. It was like drowning in ice, and yet, there was something else in it, too. A strange, forbidden strength, something ancient that made my skin crawl and my heart race. "Do it!" Mara shouted, her voice rising in panic. The Wyrms were almost upon us. I had no choice. I could feel the power building, the pressure in my chest, the raw force of the heart flowing through me. There was a choice I had to make, one that would seal our fate. With one final breath, I focused the energy that was surging through me, pulling it from the heart and into myself. The Wyrms were coming faster now, their roars deafening, their scales gleaming like ice in the dim light. Then I did what had to be done. I released everything, my blood, my life, my very essence, into the heart. For a moment, everything went still. The chamber, the Wyrms, even the air itself seemed to freeze in place. And then, the heart exploded with a blinding light that sent shockwaves through the cavern, cracking the ice and shattering the stone beneath our feet. The Wyrms screamed, and the light, blinding and pure, consumed everything. The light of the heart exploded around us in a blinding flare, a burst of power that shattered the walls of the cavern and sent the air thick with a deafening, overwhelming hum. It was the sound of life and death woven together, a force so primal that I thought it might tear me apart. The energy, the magic, it was too much, too strong. It pressed against me like 1,000 frozen hands, each one clawing at my soul, and I gasped, feeling my chest tighten. And then the pain. The ground beneath us buckled and cracked, and the air froze into jagged shards. I could feel the ice biting into my skin, my blood running cold as the Wyrms roars shook the very foundations of the mountain. Their massive forms were closing in, too close, too fast. I could hear their claws scraping across the stone, their growls shaking the walls. I had given everything to the heart, the last of my life, my blood, my will. But now it wasn't just my fate that was sealed. The Wyrms were waking, fury unleashed. The creatures of old who had been bound beneath the ice for centuries, kept at bay by the heart's magic. The heart had died, but so had something else. The Wyrms were no longer just creatures. They were part of the mountain itself, of the very fabric of Skyreach. The balance had been broken. The final breath of the heart had shattered their chains, and the Wyrms were free. The chamber around us was in ruins, ice and stone shattered, the air thick with the acrid stench of burning frost and melting rock. I could feel the ground shaking as the Wyrms raged through the caverns, tearing through the very core of Skyreach. They were unstoppable now. The last remnants of the heart's magic had been drained, sacrificed for a fleeting moment of hope, but it wasn't enough. We were out of time. I could barely move. The weight of the energy from the heart had drained me to my core. I was standing, but barely. My legs felt like they might give out at any second. Mara was beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The Wyrms, they're not just hunting us anymore. They're tearing everything down. Skyreach is dying." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. The air felt like it was closing in around me, pressing against my chest with every breath. The Wyrms roars grew louder, their terrifying screeches filling the cavern with a sound that made my teeth ache. "We need to leave," I rasped, my voice weak. "We need to get out of here now." But even as I spoke, I knew it was too late. The Wyrms had broken through the heart's protective barrier, and now there was nothing stopping them. Skyreach was doomed, and so were we. I stumbled forward, trying to keep my balance as the ground trembled beneath me. My mind was foggy, my thoughts sluggish. The heart's energy was still flickering inside me, like a dying ember in a freezing wind. Mara grabbed my arm, pulling me with surprising strength. "Kai, look!" She pointed toward the entrance of the cavern, her voice frantic. "There's a way out. If we can make it to the surface, we might still have a chance." I turned, following her gaze to where a massive crack had appeared in the ice, the remnants of an old passageway, long forgotten. The entrance was barely visible in the chaotic light, but I could make out the outline of the tunnel. It was our only hope, but the Wyrms were already on the move. Their massive forms burst through the ice, claws raking against the stone, their jaws snapping open with an unholy hunger. Their eyes, cold and unblinking, fixed on us, their massive bodies blocking the only escape route. "We can't outrun them," I muttered, my voice hollow. "There's no way we'll make it." But Mara wasn't listening. Her expression was determined, set in a grim resolve. "We don't need to outrun them. We just need to buy enough time for the rest of us to get out." I looked at her, trying to understand. "What are you talking about?" Mara's gaze shifted toward the center of the cavern, toward the heart, now little more than a shattered ruin of crystal and ice. The light had faded, the power it once held gone. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I know what has to be done. You stay here. You keep them occupied. I'll trigger the fall." The words didn't make sense at first. "What are you planning to do?" Mara's eyes were intense, her voice steady. "There's an ancient mechanism buried beneath this mountain, a way to collapse the cavern. If I can trigger it, the ice will cave in. It won't stop the Wyrms, but it will slow them down. Give the rest of us time to escape." She turned to face the Wyrms, her posture resolute as she unsheathed her jagged obsidian blade. "I can buy us a few minutes." My chest tightened with horror. "Mara, no. You can't." But she was already running, darting toward the back of the cavern, toward the jagged stone walls where a faint, glimmering light was flickering. The Wyrms followed her instantly, their roars filling the air, their massive forms surging forward, swarming to their prey. I couldn't let her do this alone. But my legs were shaking, my body too weak, the ice around me slick with the melting frost of the heart's final breath. Every step felt like it might be my last. But I forced myself to move, to follow her into the heart of the chaos. The Wyrms were closer now, their jaws snapping with every step. I could see their eyes, cold, empty, filled with ancient fury. They were coming for us, and there was no escape. I caught up with Mara just as she reached the mechanism. She was standing in front of a stone slab embedded in the cavern wall, her hands pressed to the cold surface. The Wyrms were right behind us, their massive forms closing in, their breath freezing the air. "Do it!" I screamed. With a final, desperate push, Mara activated the mechanism. A low rumble filled the cavern, followed by a deafening roar as the stone slab slid away, revealing a series of jagged, ice-encrusted chains. The ice above us began to crack, and the ceiling began to tremble. The Wyrms roared in fury as the mountain itself seemed to shift, the very bones of Skyreach beginning to collapse. "Run!" Mara shouted. We didn't need to be told twice. We turned and sprinted toward the only exit left, the cracks in the ice widening as the cavern began to implode around us. The Wyrms were still coming, their enormous bodies crashing through the debris, their jaws snapping inches from our heels. We made it to the tunnel just as the ceiling caved in, sending a massive wave of ice and rock crashing behind us. I could feel the Wyrms' fury as the mountain tore itself apart, their screeches echoing through the collapsing corridors. But it was too late. Skyreach was falling, the once immense mountain crumbling into the abyss. The Wyrms have been unleashed, the heart has been sacrificed, and Skyreach is no more. But in the wake of destruction, a few remain. And the future, whatever it may hold, has changed forever. The survivors have made it out, but at what cost? The Wyrms are still out there, and the world will never be the same again. But one question remains. Will the ancient forces of Skyreach rise again, or has the curse been finally broken?